Every time you felt betrayed, disrespected, or overlooked, you were told to man up, to suppress it, to move on. But deep down, the pain lingered, didn't it? What if I told you there's a way to ensure that nothing and nobody will ever hurt you again? Not through numbness, but through unshakable strength. Stay with me. Men, it's time to reclaim your power. For too long, you've been conditioned to believe that your worth is tied to external validation, titles, money, relationships. But here's the truth. Your strength lies within. By embracing Stoic principles, you can build an inner fortress so resilient that no external force can penetrate it. Comment below. I choose strength. Number 1. Pain is not personal. You've been taught to carry pain like it's part of your identity, as if the weight of betrayal, the sting of rejection, or the suffocating silence of being ignored somehow defines who you are. But the deeper truth, the one that separates men who stay broken from those who become forged in fire, is this. Pain isn't something someone gives you, it's something inside you that gets triggered. And if you can understand where that pain really comes from, you can begin to tear out its roots one by one until nothing outside of you has the power to control the way you feel ever again. Because the reality most men avoid is that the person who insulted you, the woman who left, the friend who ghosted you, they didn't cause the pain. They only exposed the parts of you you haven't faced, the beliefs you've carried since childhood that told you that you weren't enough unless someone else proved it. And once you see that clearly, you'll start to feel something rare and powerful. Emotional independence, the kind that doesn't scream for attention or validation, but sits in complete peace because you've finally stopped outsourcing your self-worth to people who were never capable of giving it to you in the first place. And the moment you stop making everything about you, why she left, why they said that, why you were overlooked, is the same moment you stop being owned by people's opinions. Because here's the reality, most men can't stomach. You gave them permission to hurt you by believing their actions had anything to do with your value. And until you pull that belief out of your mind like a splinter, you'll keep bleeding emotionally every time life doesn't go your way. Every time someone doesn't see you, every time you get disrespected. But the Stoics knew this. They knew that insult, loss, betrayal, shame, all of it is neutral until your perception gives it weight. And once you master your perception, you control everything. So stop looking outward, stop playing the victim, and start asking the real questions. Why do I need her to respect me? Why do I need that recognition? Why do I get so defensive when someone critiques me? Because if your inner response is chaos, it means there's something within you still believing that outside forces define your identity. And if that's true, then you've already handed over your peace to the world, and the world will never treat you the way you think you deserve. So you will live in frustration, bitterness, and blame until you take that power back and realize nothing they say or do can touch you unless you let it in. And this is where emotional invincibility begins, not when people stop hurting you, but when you stop reacting to their pain as if it's your responsibility to carry it. Because hurt people, and most of what's been done to you wasn't even about you. It was about someone else's brokenness spilling onto your life. So why do you keep picking it up, wearing it, internalizing it, replaying it? Stop making their chaos your story. Stop dragging their dysfunction into your identity. Because the moment you detach from their narrative is the moment you create your own. And your story should be this: I no longer take things personally, not because I'm numb, not because I don't feel, but because I finally see through the illusion that pain from others must become pain within me. And when you really internalize that, when you make that shift, not in theory, but in how you live, how you respond, how you carry yourself, then suddenly the disrespect bounces off. The rejection doesn't shake you. The betrayal doesn't break you, because you know it's not about you. It's never been about you, and it never will be. And that's where freedom lives. That's where peace begins. And that's where the man you've been trying to become all along finally starts to emerge. Not because life got easier, not because people finally treated you right, but because you stopped needing any of it to feel strong, to feel enough, to feel powerful. Because that power was inside you all along, just buried under years of false beliefs and silent pain that you never gave yourself permission to face. And now that you have, now that you know, you can never go back to blaming the world again. And that, right there, is the beginning of a life where nothing and nobody will ever hurt you again, because when you were a boy, they probably never told you this. But every emotional scar you've carried into manhood, every moment you felt small, humiliated, embarrassed, or invisible, it didn't happen because the world was cruel. It happened because you believed the world was supposed to make you feel safe. You thought love was owed. You thought respect was promised. You thought that if you did the right thing, people would never abandon you. And when life shattered that illusion, you broke. Not because of what they did, but because you believed they had the right to decide your worth. This is the root. This is where most men get trapped. They grow up chasing approval from women, praise from society, validation from weak people who couldn't even validate themselves. And every time they don't get it, they fall into that same emotional pit again and again, not realizing that it's not rejection that hurts. It's that they still believe they're only worthy if they're accepted. But acceptance is a drug. And like any drug, it makes you dependent. If your peace is based on how people treat you, you'll never have peace. Because people are unpredictable. They lie, they leave, they disappoint. They project their brokenness onto you and call it truth. And if you don't know who you are, if you haven't built a rock-solid identity that exists regardless of how others see you, you will believe them. You'll take it personal. You'll think the breakup means you weren't enough. You'll think the insult means you were weak. You'll think the betrayal means you were stupid, and then you'll spiral. But the only thing that really happened was this. Someone showed you who they are, and you let it define who you are. That's the mistake. That's the tragedy. Because your identity doesn't come from the way they treat you, it comes from the way you respond. If your response is desperation, self-doubt, rage, depression, then you haven't built that foundation yet. And that's where Stoicism comes in. That's where you start to take your mind back. Because when you realize that pain is only personal if you allow it to be, you start to gain control over what used to control you. You stop needing closure. You stop overanalyzing texts. You stop trying to prove your worth to people who left. And you start standing still, emotionally still, while the world spins around you, while chaos rages, while people act out their drama, and you remain unbothered. Not because you're cold, but because you've finally decided that your worth is not a democracy. It's not up for vote. You've decided that no matter what she says, no matter what he thinks, no matter who walks out, who mocks you, who misunderstands you, you are still whole, still grounded, still unshaken. And that decision, that's power. That's the kind of power no one can take, because no one gave it to you. You built it through discipline, through rejection, through solitude, through truth. And yes, it might mean you'll walk alone sometimes. It might mean fewer people understand you. But that's the price of peace. That's the cost of invincibility. Because once you stop letting people's actions dictate your emotions, they lose all control over you. And that's terrifying to people who rely on manipulation. It's threatening to people who feed on your weakness. But to you, it's freedom, the purest kind of freedom. Because pain stops being a threat. Rejection becomes data, criticism becomes noise, and even betrayal becomes a redirection, not a devastation. This is what it means to be unshakable, not emotionless, but deeply in control. So next time someone disrespects you, don't collapse. Don't react. Watch, observe, breathe, and then respond, not with anger, not with desperation, but with calm, with stillness, with that quiet fire that says, "You don't get to define me." Because when you live like that, you've already won. And most men will never know that victory because they're still living for approval, still begging to be seen, still waiting for the world to say, "You matter." But you don't need that. You never did. What you need is discipline, clarity, truth, and a mind so fortified that nothing and nobody will ever hurt you again. Number 2, stop trying to fix people. One of the greatest emotional prisons a man can live in is the belief that he must fix people to earn love, to prove worth, to finally be chosen. And if you've ever begged for someone to change, tried to heal someone who didn't ask, fought to make someone see your value, or poured your energy into someone who drained it like it was their right, then you've been trapped inside that prison too. A prison built on the lie that love and peace are something you extract from another person's transformation, when in reality, every time you try to fix someone, you hand over your peace to their chaos, and you tell yourself it's noble, that you're helping, that you're doing what a good man should. But underneath that story is something darker, something few men are ever brave enough to face. You're not fixing them out of strength, you're fixing them out of fear. Fear that if they don't change, you won't be loved. Fear that if they stay broken, you'll stay unwanted. Fear that if they walk away, it'll mean you weren't enough to save them. And once you admit that, the entire illusion starts to break, because you start to see that all the emotional labor you've done for people who never asked, all the pain you've absorbed just to feel needed, all the nights you spent trying to decode mixed signals and repair dysfunction, it wasn't strength. It was a desperate attempt to control someone else's behavior so you could finally feel okay inside. But no matter how many times you try to fix someone, no matter how many times you sacrifice your needs, abandon your standards, suppress your anger, and twist yourself into emotional shapes to keep someone around, it will never create love. It will only destroy your identity, because every time you try to fix someone who doesn't want to be fixed, you send a silent message to yourself. Their growth is more important than my peace. And that belief, left unchallenged, will rot your masculinity from the inside out. It will make you tolerant of abuse, addicted to dysfunction, and convinced that if you just do more, give more, prove more, they'll finally wake up and love you the way you deserve. But they won't. Because people don't change because you want them to. They change when their reality hits them hard enough, and if they haven't reached that breaking point, no amount of your healing energy will touch them. In fact, it will only make things worse, because people who are not ready to change will resent anyone who tries to lift the mask they've grown comfortable hiding behind. And your effort to love them into awareness will be interpreted as an attack, not as support. So you'll find yourself fighting battles that aren't yours, bleeding for people who blame you for their wounds, sacrificing for someone who never asked to be saved. And every time they resist, you'll try harder, give more, explain more, and shrink yourself in the process. And what you don't realize is that in trying to fix them, you're slowly abandoning yourself. And one day you'll wake up and not recognize the man in the mirror, because you'll have traded your clarity for chaos, your peace for a project, your masculinity for martyrdom. And for what? For someone who didn't even ask to be changed, someone who didn't respect the help you offered, someone who took and took and took until there was nothing left but your own resentment, and by then it'll be too late. The damage will be done, the bitterness will set in, and the lesson you refuse to learn will now echo louder than ever. You cannot fix anyone, and it is not your job to try, because when you believe it is, you're not being selfless, you're being manipulative, not maliciously but emotionally, because the attempt to fix is just a disguised attempt to control, and the Stoics warned us about this. They taught that peace comes from focusing only on what is within your control, and another person's mind, heart, or healing journey is never under your control, no matter how close you are, no matter how much history you share, no matter how much you believe you see their potential, and every second you spend obsessing over what they could be if they'd just listen, if they'd just grow, is a second you're not living your life, not building your path, not becoming the man you're supposed to be, because you're tangled in someone else's timeline, and you're holding your happiness hostage to their progress, which may never come. And even if it does, it won't come because of you. It'll come in spite of you, because their change has to be for them, not for you, not for the relationship, not for some future promise. And the moment you let go of the need to fix them, you step back into power. The power to walk away from what isn't working, the power to say no without guilt, the power to stop explaining yourself, defending your standards, or begging to be treated right, because you finally see that love is not sacrifice. It is self-respect in action, and that means loving someone enough to let them go if their presence requires you to abandon yourself. And if that scares you, good. It means you're finally ready to face what's underneath the fixer, the scared little boy who thought he had to save people to be worthy, the boy who learned that being needed was safer than being seen, the boy who carried everyone else's pain because no one ever helped him with his own. And now it's time to break that cycle. Now it's time to stop pouring into people who only drain you and start pouring into yourself, not out of selfishness, but out of clarity. Because the man who builds himself no longer needs to fix others to feel strong. He becomes strong by mastering his own emotions, by controlling his own mind, by stepping into reality without needing anyone to follow. And when he does, something incredible happens. He stops attracting people who need to be fixed and starts attracting people who are already building themselves too. People who bring peace, not projects. People who reflect his power, not test it. And that's the kind of life a man deserves. Not one built on codependence, confusion, or control, but one rooted in freedom, clarity, and truth. Because when you stop trying to fix people, you start fixing your life. Number 3, detachment is power. Most men are slaves, and not because they're physically chained, but because their happiness, confidence, and peace are all attached to things they don't control. How she feels about them, how their boss treats them, whether the world sees them as successful, or how many likes they get from people who wouldn't even show up if they were truly broken. And the most brutal truth of all is that the majority of emotional suffering men carry doesn't come from life itself, but from attachment to how they expected life to go. Because the moment something doesn't match the fantasy they created, the moment a woman loses interest, a job slips away, a friend changes, or the validation stops flowing, they collapse inside. And that collapse isn't caused by reality, it's caused by resistance, a refusal to let go of a story that was never real, a clinging to expectations they thought would protect them from pain. And this is why detachment isn't a luxury. It's survival, because if you don't learn how to detach, the world will eat you alive emotionally, and every relationship will become a trap. Every opportunity a ticking bomb, every change a threat to your identity. But when you truly detach, not by giving up, not by being passive, but by letting go of your emotional addiction to outcomes, you become untouchable, not because nothing happens to you, but because nothing controls you. And this is where real freedom starts. When you no longer need anything to go your way in order to stay calm, when you no longer chase approval, attention, or consistency from others just to feel okay, when you no longer base your entire sense of self on what people give or take away from you. And that's the real root of pain for most men, isn't it? They don't suffer because people left. They suffer because their identity was attached to being chosen. They don't break because the job was lost. They break because they thought the title made them valuable. They don't rage because someone disagreed. They rage because they needed to be right to feel secure. And until you sever those emotional strings, you are not a man. You are a puppet, controlled by every person who knows how to withhold affection, how to question your choices, how to threaten your fragile ego, and you will go through life constantly on edge, constantly defending, proving, chasing, and performing, not because it's necessary, but because you never learned how to live without needing, without grasping, without attaching. And the Stoics knew this. They knew that the key to strength wasn't just self-control, it was emotional freedom from attachment, from illusion, from the desperate belief that something outside of you needs to be a certain way for you to be okay inside. And until you break that belief, every high will be followed by a crash. Every love will turn to fear. Every success will feel hollow, because attachment is a thief. It robs you of presence, it robs you of perspective, it robs you of peace. And the more you attach, the more you fear loss. And the more you fear loss, the more you suffer in advance for things that haven't even happened yet. And that is no way to live. That is a slow psychological death, a constant emotional hostage situation where you wake up every day asking, will I be okay if, instead of choosing to be okay no matter what? And that choice isn't easy, because detachment requires loss, not of people, but of the fantasy you built around them, not of ambition, but of entitlement to success, not of connection, but of codependence on how others behave. And the man who can detach from all that, the man who can walk into any room, any relationship, any situation, and say, I'm here because I choose to be, not because I need to be. That man is rare, that man is dangerous, that man is free, because you can't bribe him with praise, you can't control him with criticism, and you can't manipulate him with guilt. And most of all, you can't break him, because he was never holding on to begin with. He was present, committed, invested, but never dependent. And that's the difference between healthy strength and emotional slavery. Healthy strength gives everything without needing anything, while emotional slavery gives everything in hopes of receiving something back. And when it doesn't come, resentment grows, weakness follows, and identity crumbles. But when you detach, you don't need to fake confidence. You don't need to act like you don't care, because you've built a mindset so rooted in reality, in values, in clarity, that people's approval becomes irrelevant, outcomes become flexible, and life becomes light. Because the weight of control, the burden of needing, the constant fear of loss no longer live in your chest. And that's when you finally start to experience real relationships, real presence, real purpose. Because everything you do comes from overflow, not from desperation. And every version of yourself that you used to perform for others begins to fade, because you no longer need to impress, convince, or be understood to feel valid. And yes, some people will misinterpret that strength as arrogance. Some will say you've changed. Some will even call you cold. But what they're really feeling is their own discomfort around a man who can no longer be swayed by emotional games, a man who doesn't beg, a man who doesn't need to chase what he can walk away from at any moment, not out of indifference, but out of power, the kind of power that says, I choose peace over chaos, truth over fantasy, freedom over obsession. And that power doesn't come from pretending you don't care. It comes from building a life where you've already accepted every possible loss and decided to thrive anyway. And when you live like that, the world starts to shift. People respect you more, not because you demanded it, but because they sense that you're not playing the same game, that you're not bargaining for connection, that you've reached a level of emotional discipline where silence doesn't scare you, distance doesn't define you, and rejection doesn't break you, because you've already made peace with the worst-case scenario and found strength on the other side. And the moment you master that mindset is the moment you realize that everything they said would make you strong, status, sex, praise, winning, None of it compares to the calm of knowing that nothing and nobody will ever hurt you again, because you finally stopped building your peace on sand and started building it on the solid ground of truth, choice, and detachment. Number 4. Become emotionally bulletproof. There's a version of you that nothing can break. Not silence, not betrayal, not loss, not disrespect. And he isn't a fantasy. He isn't some unreachable ideal. He's buried under every lie you were taught about what strength looks like, what masculinity is, and what it means to be enough in a world that weaponizes your emotions, trains you to react, and programs you to chase external validation like a dog chasing shadows. And if you want to become emotionally bulletproof, you have to realize that your emotions aren't the problem. Your ignorance of their origin is, because every time you explode, every time you spiral, every time you shut down or lose control or become consumed by anxiety or rage or fear, it's not because of what someone did to you. It's because there's something inside you that still believes your worth depends on that person, on that outcome, on that approval, and that belief is your cage, not your circumstances, not your past, not your trauma, but the belief that how you feel is something others are responsible for. And until you kill that belief, you'll keep being a puppet, dancing to the strings of every emotion that gets triggered by things you don't control, reacting like your life is on fire every time someone pulls away, looks at you wrong, says the wrong thing, or doesn't give you what you wanted. And that's not strength. That's not manhood. That's spiritual slavery. And no matter how big your body gets, no matter how much money you stack, no matter how alpha you act online, if your emotions are fragile, you're still weak, because strength isn't measured by control over others. It's measured by control over yourself. And becoming emotionally bulletproof doesn't mean becoming numb. It doesn't mean pretending you don't feel. It means becoming so radically self-aware that you can feel everything and still not be ruled by any of it. It means being so locked in, so grounded in your core values, your purpose, your standards, that you stop responding to noise like it's a signal. That you stop giving your energy to people who only want to provoke. That you stop chasing clarity from people who thrive on confusion, because you don't need to fix what's broken in them. You need to master what's still broken in you. And the truth is, most of what's breaking you isn't real pain. It's the illusion that you were supposed to be protected from life, that no one was supposed to disrespect you, that women were supposed to be loyal if you were good enough, that friends were supposed to stay, that opportunities were supposed to come to the deserving, and when life showed you otherwise, you got bitter. But bitterness is just unprocessed grief. And grief is just evidence that you've attached your identity to something outside of your control. And when you finally realize that everything that breaks you is connected to an illusion you haven't yet let go of, you will finally see clearly. And from that clarity comes discipline. And from discipline comes stillness. And from stillness comes power. Because when the storm comes, and it will, you won't be flinching. You won't be pleading. You won't be drowning in emotion or throwing tantrums or texting novels or threatening to walk away just to feel heard. You'll be calm, not because you don't care, but because you no longer depend on chaos to feel alive. And that's what most men are addicted to. Chaos, drama, emotional highs and lows, constant conflict to fill the silence they never made peace with. But that silence is the key. That silence is where the real work happens. That silence is where you meet yourself without the masks, without the performance, without the noise. And when you can sit in that silence, completely okay, completely focused, completely centered, you become a man no one can shake. A man who doesn't need attention to feel worthy, who doesn't need revenge to feel powerful, who doesn't need to win an argument to feel respected, because he knows that respect begins and ends with how he moves, how he thinks, how he carries himself. And nothing anyone says or does can touch that. And when you walk through the world like that, when you no longer take things personal, when you no longer react like a slave to every emotional trigger, when you no longer need people to love you to love yourself, you don't just become emotionally bulletproof, you become emotionally immortal, because your spirit cannot be touched by things that don't live inside you anymore, and that's the key. To become untouchable, you must first be willing to confront every part of you that still bleeds, that still waits, that still needs, and you must do it without excuses, without delay, without blaming your parents, your past, your ex, or your environment. Because as long as you're pointing the finger outward, you are handing over your emotional power like a child crying for a parent that's never coming back. But when you finally say, "This is mine to fix," everything begins to shift. And yes, it will be brutal. Yes, it will burn. Yes, it will force you to see things you've avoided your entire life. But that's the initiation. That's the cost. Because there's no strength without pain, no peace without war, no self-mastery without total destruction of the weak version of yourself that once blamed the world for everything he felt. And once you walk through that fire, once you bury that version of yourself, you rise, calm, clear, collected, and so deeply locked into who you are that nothing and nobody can ever hurt you again, not because you're protected, but because you've made peace with every outcome, because you've faced every fear, because you've turned every pain into armor, not the kind that disconnects you, but the kind that reinforces you, not the kind that hides your emotions, but the kind that holds them with discipline. And that's what emotional bulletproofing really is. It's not arrogance, it's not apathy, it's not emotional isolation. It's the relentless practice of becoming the kind of man whose emotions serve him, not sabotage him. And if you want to do that in practice, then you need to rebuild your foundation from the ground up. When your mind is chaotic, go for a walk in complete silence with no phone, because your thoughts are clearer when your body is moving. When you feel rage boiling over, don't text, don't post, drop to the ground and do push-ups until the urge fades. Transmute that energy into strength instead of words you'll regret. When your anxiety creeps in about the unknown, sit down and journal for 10 minutes. Ask yourself, what am I trying to control? And answer without lying. When life hits hard and you feel fragile, get to the gym. Because a strong body reinforces a strong mind, and lifting weights is the most honest feedback you'll get all day. You either showed up or you didn't. When your mind spirals, breathe. Inhale for 4 seconds, hold for 4, exhale for 4, again and again until the storm slows down. When someone disrespects you, don't lash out. Observe, smile, and walk away like a man who has nothing to prove, because real power doesn't explain itself. And above all, meditate every morning before the world reaches you. 5 minutes of stillness to set your frame, to remind yourself who you are and who you're not. Because if you don't anchor your identity daily, someone else will decide it for you. And when you make these practices daily, non-negotiable, sacred, you're not just surviving, you're sharpening, you're building, you're becoming that rare kind of man who isn't just emotionally strong, but emotionally sovereign, emotionally lethal, emotionally untouchable. And if you build that version of yourself, not once, but every single day, then no matter what comes, you'll face it head-on. If this woke something up inside you, don't keep it to yourself. There are men out there living in silence, bleeding behind closed doors, searching for this truth. If this changed your perspective even 1%, imagine what it could do for them. Like the video. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you're building the kind of mind that nothing and nobody can ever break. Comment below, "I'm unbreakable." This isn't just a video, it's clarity. And your support helps make it accessible to the next man who's ready to transform his life.